Hi, this is Mike with TCAT's Deep Vinyl Tracks, coming on today to start my series about King Crimson. I would like to, over the next, I don't know how many episodes, go through the studio discography of King Crimson, and talk about their albums, a bit about their history, and so on. So I'm going to attempt to do this, battling the last part of COVID, so hopefully my voice will hold out and everything. But anyway, let's get right into this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of King Crimson and how they got put together. They were actually formed back in 1968 in London, England. However, in 1967, Michael and Peter Giles were actually looking for somebody that could play the organ and that could also sing, so they could put together a group that they had planned. Well, after advertising for this, Robert Fripp answered this ad and ended up getting the job, even though he couldn't sing and he didn't play the organ. He was a guitarist. So it was an interesting start, to say the least. They hired him on anyway, and the three of them put together some songs, some rather quirky songs with kind of a folkish sound, a lot of humor to the lyrics and things like that. So they recorded a few singles, and they also recorded an album that goes by the name of The Cheerful Insanity of Giles, and Fripp. So these were, like I said, kind of folk-oriented songs, but with a lot of humor to them. Both Michael and Peter Giles wrote most of the songs, but Fripp also wrote 3 of the songs that were on the album. One of them was instrumental, and you could tell Fripp's music was probably a little more complex than that of the Giles songs. The record company argued that there was a lack of any commercial breakthrough hit, and that really was on their music, so they recruited Ian MacDonald, who also brought in his girlfriend at the time, whose name was Judy Dybel. Judy Dybel was the lead singer for Fairport Convention. She didn't stay with the band very long. It wasn't long before her and Ian broke up, so Judy ended up leaving the band at that time, but there were a few actual demos that made with her singing, though she didn't land on any particular album or anything. So the story goes, they released the album. It did okay, but it didn't do great. And in the meantime, Robert Fripp went out and went to a concert by a band called Clouds. Now, Clouds, being sort of a progressive band, not heard of too much these days. However, there was a time when they were considered the next big thing. They recorded for the label Chrysalis. However, Chrysalis decided not to put their money behind Clouds. They were more interested in putting their money behind another band, which happened to be called Jethro Tull. So, but the thing that the band Clouds, did end up contributing to music is the fact that Robert Fripp, after seeing their concert, decided he would like to put a lot more of a classical element to the music. And as time went on, he became less and less interested in Peter Giles' songs, and suggested that they recruit his friend Greg Lake. Of course, Greg Lake is the same Greg Lake that would eventually help form Emerson, Lake and Palmer. However, at this time, he was fairly unknown. Peter became upset because of the lack of success of the album and ended up leaving. And so Lake was then brought in. So November 30th of 1968, King Crimson was finally founded. The name was changed and everything because this was a whole completely different type of music. Their first rehearsal was in January 13th of 1969. And Ian MacDonald, Greg Lake, and Robert Fripp were the ones that formed the band. Ian MacDonald became the primary composer, and and there were, of course, contributions by both Lake and Fripp. Peter Sinfield was hired to become the lyricist. So he never actually played or sang on any of the albums, but he did write all the music. Also, let's see, Michael Giles was still with the band also at this time. The band bought a Mellotron, and it was inspired, the fact that this was purchased and put into their music was inspired by the band, the Moody Blues. So they wanted to concentrate more on complicated music with kind of a classical element to it, adding also a jazz element, and so the music became more complicated, and they used some expansive chords with the Mellotron. Of course, we just formulated the sound that the first King Crimson record would have. So we had a combination on this first record, of course, called In the Court of the Crimson King. And everybody knows the album cover. It's one of the most famous album covers out there. So the 10th of October 1969, In the Court of the Crimson King, the full title also being An Observation by King Crimson. The music on this album is a combination of classical music, psych rock, folk, jazz, military music, and free improvisation. It became an instant success, reached number 5 in the UK charts and number 28 in the US charts, and was certified gold. The famous cover and also the inner part of the gatefold was painted as a self-portrait by Barry Godber. The self-portrait was as he was viewing a mirror. He died of a heart attack shortly after the album's release, so he never really knew how famous this painting would become, how iconic of a cover it would be. The band loved the cover, of course, and called the man on the outer cover the Schizoid Man. The one on the inner gatefold is known as the Crimson King. And you also have lyrics on this side of the gatefold. So we have Peter Sinfield wrote all the lyrics to the album. Robert Fripp, Ian MacDonald, Michael Giles, and Greg Lake were all considered composers. The first song on the album was 21st Century Schizoid Man. Interesting, they would start out with such a loud and exciting song as this, as most of the rest of the album is more laid back. But the song itself criticizes the Vietnam War. The total length of the song is around 7.5 minutes. They're heavy, distorted vocals sung by Greg Lake, and they have been processed to a certain extent to kind of give it that eerie, crazy, lunatic fringe type of sound. There's a instrumental section in the song itself that is the center part of the song, which is entitled Mirrors. However, it's all incorporated in the song. the entire song. Um, for the most part, the meter on this is the regular 4/4 meter, but it also switches to 6/4 time several times throughout, which makes it a very progressive sounding song. Um, and it stays in this meter for most of the time, except for a few parts where there's some bursts of loud jazz and instrumental noise throughout, where it kind of goes into a free meter. Um, the song itself encompasses heavy metal, industrial, fusion, and progressive rock and progressive metal. Um, Even though progressive metal was not really a thing then, and progressive rock this was the album that started the progressive rock movement. Um, so all of these things together, the complex sound of it and everything, turned it into a progressive music. And it set the standard for many progressive bands to come after. So 21st Century Schizoid Man, crowd favorite. I think it's played pretty much at every King Crimson concert, even now. Just a great song. Very almost disturbing at some points, loud at some points, but not just using guitar, but using a mix of guitar and saxophone, which makes it even more interesting. The second track on the album takes a completely different turn and goes more towards the sort of folkish sound that Giles, and Fripp had previously. The music is a little more developed, though. The song is called I Talk to the Wind. The timing on it is 6 minutes and 5 seconds. The lyrics, of course, were by Peter Sinfield. The composer credits is solely to Ian MacDonald. Like I said, it's complete contrast from the previous song, 21st Century Schizoid Man. This one is more serene, peaceful, simple. The music is led mostly by flute and a flute with some classically inspired instrumental breaks. Greg Lake sings the vocals. There are some demo versions out there, one with Judy Dybel singing and Peter Giles singing, different versions of that are available. The genres that this particular track covers are like folk rock, classical rock, and prog rock. So that's the second track. There are 5 total tracks on the album, by the way. The third track and the last track on the first side is Epitaph. Peter Sinfield is credited for the lyrics on this one, of course, and Fripp, Giles, Lake, and MacDonald are all credited as composers. The total time on this is 8 minutes and 47 seconds. This one is more drenched with the mellotron. Some beautiful themes in this particular track. Very emotional, very almost operatic, I guess. Dramatic would be a better word. It has a dystopian feel, and it protests the Cold War this time around. Like I said, there's a heavy mellotron throughout this one. It's dark and foreboding, but has a very beautiful melody. And the melodic themes reoccur throughout the track. As also, it has a very heavy symphonic feel, so we go into another area of progressive music where we get into symphonic prog on this particular one. As in 21st Century Schizoid Man, there are separate internal sections. There are 2 internal sections with this one called March for No Reason, and the other one called Tomorrow and Tomorrow. These are all put together internally into the song. It's not like they're separate songs with breaks in between them. They're all incorporated throughout the track. The genres for this particular track include symphonic rock, folk rock, and progressive rock. The first track on side 2, or track 4 overall, is the track called Moonchild. Again, lyrics written by Peter Sinfield, Robert Fripp, Michael Giles, Greg Lake, and Ian MacDonald are credited as composers. The total time on this track is 12 minutes and 13 seconds, and it's broken up into 2 main sections. The first section is called The Dream, and The Dream is a very Mellotron-driven ballad, and it takes up the first 2.5 minutes of this 12-minute track. It's a very quiet song, but at the same time very melodic and accessible. That's the complete opposite of the rest of the track, which is called The Illusion. The Illusion is made up of mostly free-form improvisation, and it's quite minimal. A lot of people don't like this track because they consider it kind of meandering. Some people even go so far as to say it's sort of a waste of time. I don't know if I would go that far. It is not an easy track to listen to, the last part of it, in that it does tend to meander around a bit, but it uses jazz improvisation to do so, and like I say, very minimal. So I don't know, a lot of people, I can see why they would have difficulty listening to that particular track. A lot of them skip over it altogether, even though it takes up 12 minutes. The genre for this particular track is avant-garde, so that's what makes it difficult to listen to for a lot of people. It's considered art rock, a lot of free improvisation, like I said before. However, it is also considered progressive. So that is track 4, Moonchild.